Hello, I'm Diana Tickell and I'm the Chief Executive of NABS. My pronouns are she, her. We hope that by producing this film that we are helping us all continue on our learning journeys on diversity, equity and inclusion. Active listening to those who are experiencing inequality and who are driving real change is invaluable, as is providing the platform to hear these voices. Inclusion matters for everyone in our industry. I've been struck to the core by the experiences of exclusion that I have heard. Every leader needs to make it clear that we will listen without judgment and act fairly to address what we are told. But I've also been inspired by the commitment to change and by those who I've met on my journey who are sharing their experiences. Thank you for participating, listening, learning and taking action so that we can genuinely create a more inclusive industry.
In our industry, inclusion matters because it ensures that everybody is seen, valued and heard, and it allows communities to be recognised and supported.
Unless we have the people inside the industry which reflect modern Britain, then the content that we create will not be relevant. It will not be listened to, seen, heard, viewed. So we need to ensure that the people within our industry are able to reflect the insight and stories of the consumers that we're trying to reach.
I feel that inclusion is really critical right now and it really matters in our industry, particularly because I think we have so much power to actually invoke really good and positive representation and change. And I think that overall, the more that we represent the wider society, the more that we connect with everyone.
Quite simply, inclusion matters in our industry so that brands can stay relevant, impactful and in demand. In order to make effective connection and engagement with consumers, there is no argument against the critical role representation plays. You can't achieve this if your advertising and your marketing communication doesn't represent the society and the culture of modern Britain. Genuine, authentic representation across all levels, across all components of the process, both in front and behind the lens.
If I'm appealing to your business sense, I'll tell you that a McKinsey & Company report published in 2020 found that companies with more ethnic and cultural diversity outperform those with a lack of by 36%. If I'm appealing to your humanity, I'll tell you that being an outsider, just because of where you're born, who you love, your age, the colour of your skin, or how you were described as special growing up, is the most isolating feeling in the world. It makes you question your self-worth and arm you with a crippling sense of anxiety. You start to question whether you should quit and just do what others have always expected of you. Or worse, it snuffs out the hopes and dreams that you had until eventually you want to disappear too. For an industry that thrives on human truths, it'd be a failure if we let anyone feel this way.
I'm gonna steal with pride something I heard the BBC Sports commentary team talking about this morning in regards to the bronze medal hockey match, and they were talking about India becoming a real force within women's hockey, and they talked about how they've always been a solid hockey nation, but actually they made the decision to invite in coaches from different countries and with different backgrounds, really supercharge their performance. They're now actually competing for a medal in the Olympics. And one of the commentators said quite brilliantly, that's the diversity of thought that we all need. We should all be inviting in different people and different perspectives because that's how we get better. And that's why inclusion matters in the workplace.
So there is a brilliant study which was a few years old now, done in 2013 by Deloitte University for Inclusion, that coined the term covering, which is when people downplay something about themselves in order to fit in with the mainstream culture at work. 61% of people cover, according to this survey, and that increases to 66% if you are female, to 78% if you're black, and to 83% if you identify as gay. And you do not have to be Einstein to work out that if you are spending most of your working life covering, changing and suppressing something about yourselves in order to fit in with others, you're not going to be very happy. You're not going to be very productive, and that lack of productivity, that lack of happiness means that really you're not going to be focused on that workplace, not feel comfortable in that workplace, not bring the very best version of you to work. And when you're constantly having to cover that can have a massive toll on your mental health because you're not able to be who you are. And I know it's an overused phrase in terms of bringing your whole self to work and having that authenticity, but the more that we create workplaces and cultures in our organisations where people feel as though they have to cover, it is detrimental to people's mental health, detrimental to their well-being.
Well, if we are only ever talking to ourselves, how is anything ever going to change? We thought this was a very interesting and important question, not just for gender diversity, but for all forms of underrepresented diversity. Now, my day job is at a media agency, Chief Transformation Officer, and media agencies love a bit of return on investment. And I think our thinking and our questioning, and indeed some unique research that was carried out for us by Dynata for the Belonging book, cast real doubt on the return on investment from the over £6 billion that's spent on diversity and inclusion initiatives every year. So our research showed that 1 in 3 people in the UK don't agree that they belong at work. Now you might go, well, 2 out of 3 do feel they belong, but that means that if you are in a meeting with 2 colleagues and you feel as though you belong, 1 of the other people in your meeting does not. It also means that out of a UK workforce of 33 million people, 11 million people don't feel like they belong. This is huge. Over half the workforce don't believe that their leader takes personal responsibility for diversity and inclusion. And for me, most shockingly from the research, 1 in 3 people overall have actually experienced bias, harassment, or inappropriate behaviour at work. These figures are stark for those groups that are underrepresented in senior management. LGBTQ+ community, 48%, 36% of new mums, 60% of mixed race, 34% Asian, 40% Black, 59% disabled, 46% of those diagnosed with mental illness, 54% of the neurodiverse. These figures go some way to explaining why things have not changed at the top of companies.
Only 3% of boards have women at a very, very senior level, i.e. in the companies. The majority of that 36% is non-executive directors. And the figure is pretty much the same as you go down through the FTSE 250, the FTSE 350. There are 11 women CEOs, 6 BAME CEOs within that cohort. And it's just proof, as Stephanie Mehta says, that we're spending billions, but you can't buy diversity. And there's huge amounts of evidence that all of these initiatives are just initiatives. They're not driving these figures forwards. And as Trevor Phillips said, you still look at the tops of companies and it's snowy white peaks, not reflective of the community that we're actually in.
If you've ever felt left out, ostracised, omitted from consideration for jobs and opportunities and promotions, for something that's innately part of your package, that must hurt. We're all different in some way, and even the most privileged in society end up learning this soon enough. It's time to learn the way forward is to embrace different perspectives, backgrounds and views.
Authentic inclusion for me is about consumer insight, and it's simply about authentic stories. So it's not about casting at the end of a process, it's about an inclusive piece of content which is based on genuine, authentic consumer insight. And that means that our content will have real stories, real relevance, and real resonance.
To me, particularly authentic inclusion, especially when it comes to disability, looks like making sure that the entire richness and the wisdom of the disabled community is, valued and seen, rather than a singular narrative of disability.
Well, personally, I think authentic inclusion looks like the freedom for minority individuals to express our truths in the workplace. This is without fear and without consequences. It's the ability to voice our ideas, thoughts, and concerns without being tone policed, having structures in place that allows every individual to speak freely. For example, being able to sense check briefs and projects and having our opinions and views taken on board and acted upon instead of casted aside. It's also having things such as gender pay gaps being fully discussed and open for everyone in the workplace, not hidden away as a taboo topic, and having senior leadership walk the walk and not talk the talk. Take accountability and not only be brave for the work that you create, but the policies and system you put in place for your people. It's time you became fully transparent and act to solve these issues, not patch over plaster over a gaping wound.
Well, authentic inclusion in terms of what it means to me, that's something that I think is really, really critical. We live in a very cynical world, and also when we talk about inclusion and when we're being representative of people, we're not just being a box tick, we're not just trying to sort of just represent people in a really tokenistic way. It has to be authentic, so ideally using content and stories by people, about the people and the representation of the communities they are part of is absolutely critical right now and also in the future.
This might be a bit of a pipe dream, but I think authentic inclusion is an agency or an organisation where you don't have to have an inclusion conversation all the time, where you don't have to force yourself to put kind of restrictions and quotas into your recruitment process. It just happens naturally, and everyone sees the benefit, and everyone feels like they can come into work being their best selves.
Well, it doesn't look like box ticking, stereotypes or tokens for starters. The way I feel most included is when my seniors and peers are both aware and considerate of my differences, and where none of me has to be hidden.
So what's going on here? And we think that this is one of the causes of the problem, which is diversity fatigue. Diversity fatigue affects people in two ways. It affects the very people it's meant to support who are sick of yet another initiative that makes for an away day or makes for a week of speakers, but doesn't actually do anything to change the culture of the company or the situation day to day. They are fed up of being invited on stage to be the poster man or woman for whatever particular segment of the population they are meant to represent, because they just want to speak for themselves. They don't want to represent an entire set of the working population.
So what's happening in the way that these initiatives are being framed is it feels like it's pitting people against each other. It's excluding the people who are in charge, and the people whose situation we're meant to be changing just think that nothing's happening quick enough. So diversity is great, but we need to talk about difference. And we need to talk much more, as Asif Sadiq says, about where people feel that they belong in organisations, where what you can do is when you go to work is you feel like this is a place where you belong.
It's a great question. Probably one that got me thinking the most, because sadly I could think of more examples of when I've been excluded than included. Not to say that I haven't had many great experiences of inclusion, and one of them being when I was presenting to, this was a while ago, we were still talking about why D&I is a business imperative in the work. I was invited to present at a very senior exec level meeting. Unfortunately, I wasn't getting the kind of engagement I was hoping for. There were some smiles across the room. There were some empty nods, and I caught eye of out of over 10 men that were present. There were I think there was 2 women, and one of them just made eye contact with me across the board table, and firmly nodded at me and said and whispered, you got this. And I instantly felt included in the room, instantly felt what I was saying was of worth and value, even if it was making an impact and difference to one person in the room. But I was very much appreciative, and a great experience for me to have lived through.
Lots of people talk about finding their voice, but we've always had a voice. Inclusion is about when you're listened to and you're heard. So I talk a lot about diversity being lots of people with different backgrounds, lots of different thinking places, thought processes being invited into a room. True inclusion is about when you're got a seat at the table, when you're able to speak, be listened to, and be heard.
My manager once came to me to consult me privately on a seating plan for the office that was coming up. He knew and understood and had heard, me when I'm talking about my focus issues, that I can't be sat in the middle of the crowd, I need to be sat further away. He listened to that, he understood that, and he came and asked me, and I thought that was a really simple, easy, but really touching display of what it means to feel included.
I've most felt included in work when I started my own business. As a disabled wheelchair user, I had never felt included within the ad industry, particularly in the workplace, my own personal experience, which is why I set up my own business about 5 years ago, and I've really felt most included within my own business. So I'm able to create the business that I wish to see, which is super inclusive and super accessible. So that's when I felt the most included working currently within my own business.
I'm really lucky where I've worked at with Make a North. I've always felt really included, and it's blown my mind when I've listened to people who haven't felt included at work, because that's just been the norm for me. But I realised recently that maybe at university I didn't feel that included. I'd come from quite a different background and it felt quite alien to me. And actually sharing those thoughts and those stories with the Common People group has really kind of made me reassess all of those things, and actually the Common People group is one where I feel really included.
It's been from the power of allies, actually, or where being myself, someone that's bisexual, trans, and dyslexic, and also I'm mixed race, but I don't look my ethnic background. I think where it is a truly inclusive culture, where you are actively invited to be part of initiatives, part of the community and part of the culture of the work, that's really critical. But I think also through allies, it's been really, really important to feel that I can be included and to feel that my identities are not an issue, and being myself is not an issue either, but knowing that I'm actively part of the conversation and part of any activity taking place.
It's really simple. It's all about ensuring that you check your network, check who is in your circle, and ensure that you have people that are different to you in it, that are giving you the advice that you need to hear. So check your circle, that your circle is broad and diverse, and that way that you are role modelling inclusion.
Allies have to really be the ones that help make change, and I think they do that by having open conversations and talking about the issues of inclusion. I think sometimes the areas that naturally sit in inclusion, such as race, social mobility and gender, feel like topics that you're not allowed to discuss, and people get quite scared to say the wrong thing. But actually, I'm a big believer in the more you talk about it, the more comfortable it becomes, and the more people are willing to think about it and embrace it. But one thing I think is really important for allies is that they really listen to different groups, but also actually they don't shout down people who might not be an ally yet. For me, the role of an ally is all about encouraging other people to become allies, and I think that's often done by listening, but also not shouting. Like, have a nice conversation, you'll get more out of it, and no one ever wins a kind of discussion by shouting the loudest.
The easiest and most natural way is to begin by being your authentic self from today. The more people we have being open about their hidden differences are creating an ad land where people are not struggling to be normal at work and going home like shaking up Coke bottles and exploding. Allies
play a really critical role in helping create conditions of inclusion. One thing, the last 12 to 18 months have taught us is the active role allies play in making significant, positive, meaningful and quite quick change happen in the workplace. They are critical to ensuring that we are all in all D&I conversations, and it's just not the problem which has been historically of the underrepresented or marginalised groups to solve. So yeah, they are a critical component in ensuring that the change is happening at the pace that we want it to happen, that we achieve success in the way we want to achieve success. And it is not just a conversation for just a minority group of people, but we all benefit. It matters to all of us. We all have an active role to play in it.
Allies can be active by using your voice and championing the underdogs. Speak up for marginalised voices in your workplace, especially if you're in a well-respected position. Speak up when panels and events only include white male speakers. Speak up when the models, voice actors and production team involved in making your work don't include more varied faces and backgrounds. Speak up when you realise policies set in the workplace only hinder diverse talent from breaking in or getting the promotion they deserve. Speak up when you witness microaggressions, misogyny, ableism or homophobia being passed on as banter. The only time you shouldn't speak up is the time when you need to pass the mic to those who have or are experiencing obstacles which marginalise them and therefore need the platform to raise these issues. If you're a white male listening to this, your voice is what will turn the tide for people like me, so please use it.
Firstly, I prefer the word accomplice. I think allies are quite passive, so I like to be active. I think there's a great quote by Mickey Kendall that basically summarizes that allies, cheer you on, and accomplices wade in to fight too. So for me, I think what accomplices can do is really focus on, supporting people's lived experience and looking at intersectionality. To me, that's the key thing that, accomplices can do to support inclusion.
One key action leaders can do this week to make your workplace culture more inclusive is to create a safe space. Use this space to openly and honestly let people discuss how they feel about the company culture, the leadership and overall policies in place. Find your weak spots and start addressing them as a collective. A good idea which Kiko implements is a vault of veracity. It's a place where everyone can submit their suggestions, complaints, worries or ideas anonymously. Every week, senior leadership will sit down and read through everything, addressing action points or work to be made in progress to the wider team. Whatever you do, just don't sit still or do performative activism. Stop signing pledges, start taking action.
It's to exhibit inclusive behaviours, to disrupt the ingrained norms, to be consciously inclusive. There is no shortage of great intent in our industry, but it's about time we move that intent to action, which is measurable, which is something we can celebrate, something we all have access to, and something that is there for the long term, and it's not performative, and it's one here to stay.
Ask yourself, am I just trying to keep up with modern requirements and standards, or do I really want to start embracing diversity? Do I want everyone to walk and talk like me, or will I try and learn something new today? One step at a time, but at least it's a step.
As a leader, I think one of the important things that I can do to help promote inclusion is to ensure that it becomes an agenda point on every single decision board that I sit in and that I run. I think it's really important that DEI is treated as a business metric as we would any other, which means it has to be an agenda point. So making sure that we talk about it, focus on it, set KPIs around it is really important. But also it's that really easy bit about checking our own circle, checking to make sure that our circle of the most trusted people that we go to for advice is genuinely and truly inclusive.
One thing I really think leaders need to do is to invite in outside consultancies and organisations. I think you need someone who can be honest with you and firm with you and really audit what you do. I think try and solve the problem yourself isn't the right thing to do. I know there's an amazing organisation called Commercial Break who will come in and do that for you from a social mobility point of view. And there's also the Social Mobility Index, which gives you a really big view of where you sit on social mobility. But I think unless you let outside organisations in, you're never going to get a true picture of what it's like. You always want to put yourself in a positive light, and you can't solve it yourself. In the same way that we talk about diversity of thought being needed on pitches and clients, we also need diversity of thought in our own agencies. We shouldn't be a bubble of advertising professionals solving it ourselves. I would say get help in and invite in some experts. But when you do, let them be honest with you and listen to what they say.
One action that leaders can do this week to look at inclusion is, particularly when it comes to disability, learn about anti-ableism and disability justice. If you just do that one thing, that can really help to address a lot of things around inequities, particularly when it comes to disability inclusion.
One key action that particularly leaders should be doing and can be doing this week to make their workplace cultures more inclusive is to really actively think about who's not in the room. Think about who you haven't connected with, and maybe think about areas or people that maybe might make you feel uncomfortable or you don't know enough about. So use this opportunity to educate yourself more, connect with people in your workforce and in wider society. Think about your clients, think about your customers, think about areas where maybe you don't know more enough, and think about how you're going to make a change there or how you want to get closer to those people. Because as a leader, you have such an amazing platform and a sphere of responsibility, but also sphere of influence. So use that and share that privilege and share that platform as much as you can with others.
So I think that what everyone can do is, it feels really grand when you've got to do something quite big, but I think Unite for Inclusion is all around people making small steps to kind of understand what you're doing. I think committing to reading a book or listen to a podcast or watching a film on a certain topic or about a different aspect of inclusion that you should learn about is a really good way to educate yourself. But also I think it's really important that as we all unite for inclusion, we all set ourselves a target for this time next year so we can look back and understand what we've done, how it worked, and ultimately our workplace is that little bit more inclusive.
Shout about Inclusion Week. Make it a big deal. Understand why it's so important by talking to those who may be relieved they can now start being their authentic selves at work.
We can start by following through what we have signed up to, both individually, both from organisation point of view, so that collective change happens. So there is a need for recognising the value of that collective power, collective energy to drive the conversation forward. We all have signed up to making strategic alignment to D&I. We have recognised pockets of areas that need improving in our organisations, in our industry. And I think for Inclusion Week, it'll be a great week to have that laser focus, to stay connected, to stay aligned, to continue with the great work that we're doing across all levels, and ensuring that there is something that we are proud of, and it's not just a tick box for us or our organisation or our industry, and create conditions where talking about D&I is coming from a place of not being just a moral imperative, but building a strong business case to why having strong representation of diversity in our teams, both at junior right through to senior exec level, is fundamental to drive business growth and create opportunities of success. So we are all set up for success, and we all have access to progression and success.
There are many things which everyone in our industry can do to unite for inclusion this week. However, the following suggestions are purely based on my experience as a newcomer to the industry. I and a lot of juniors have noticed that advertising revolves a lot of social interactions around drinking. In fact, it's an ongoing joke. I like to nudge agencies to start becoming more aware, because there's a growing percentage of those, particularly from my age group, who don't participate in drink culture. Some for religious reasons and some because it's not for us. rock the boat and think about other social interactions that can get everyone involved, with or without a drink. The next is something most of you will have adjusted to but must keep in place for more inclusivity. Keep giving people the opportunity to remote work or have flexible working options. I live in geographic isolation and come from a lower income family. That meant commuting to book crypts was extremely costly, whilst the eye-watering cost of moving to cities like London for a 3-month, if that, placement was a massive financial risk. Had my agencies not allowed me to work remotely this whole time, I wouldn't have been able to afford to move to London before my probationary period was over. Some people don't have the luxury to take these financial risks, while some who are neurodivergent aren't able to be productive in usual office environments. Or some of us have kids and extra caring responsibilities, not to mention how much commuting costs can hinder those on lower salary brackets when starting out. My last advice is to volunteer your time and resources to organisations and charities that address inclusion issues. Organisations like Brixton Finishing School and charities like NABS, as well as countless others. Thank you for listening. Please share and show love to the wonderful work NABS are doing, and let's #Unite for Inclusion.
And I think the main takeaway that I think everyone can be doing in our industry to unite for inclusion this week is to really, really get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Look at because when you do that, you actually find new opportunities. You're going to find new areas to connect, and you're going to find new and innovative ways to actually tell a different story, to actually be ahead of the curve, and to actually bring more people with you. Because I think by uniting, that means that we are actually doing the work to actually really connect with each other. And it's also really critical for our messages that we find ways to unite people more rather than divide them.
I think when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to when it comes to disability representation and inclusion is not enough. Particularly in the disabled community, we really have to look at anti-ableism and disability justice, because without accounting for anti-ableism and disability justice within social justice movements, there is no movement at all. And often what happens with inclusion and with diversity initiatives, disability is always left out of the conversation, let alone part of the solutions. And I'm quite biased. I think that disabled people, we have infinite imagination within limitations, and particularly within the ad industry and the creative industries, we can really create so much richness and joy within the industries, but we're never part of it. And often my own personal experience has been a very negative one, trying to work within the ad industry, not succeeding and not really now wanting even to be anywhere near it with a 10-foot pole, just because of the lack of inclusion and just the toxicity of the way agencies work. And on the whole, I think it's not a very supportive environment for anyone, whether you're disabled or not, and I just think it's not great. So I just think it's important to really ensure that we're keeping an eye on disability.
So my vision for our industry in terms of inclusion, well, I hope that, one day a KPI that I set myself some time ago now is that when I walk into an event, when we're able to physically go back to physical events, that I do not walk into the room and know every person that is a person of colour in the room by first name terms, because I truly want our industry to become a brilliant fruit salad of talent, just like the rest of the UK is a brilliant fruit salad of talent, and that our industry is not one-dimensional. We have talent in all forms, whether that focuses on social mobility, whether it focuses on ability, whether it focuses on ethnicity, gender. Talent comes in all forms, and I'd like to see that from the industry at every single level, so that we have true representation.
We need everyone to lead from every seat on this one. We need to create a business world that's fit for the 21st century. Most offices and most ways of working are based, even in very new companies, are based on something that was fit for the 1870s, not even the last century, but the century before that. We need these things to change. We need an environment where everyone feels safe to bring their real selves to work, where everyone feels that they belong, everyone in the workplace, where everyone knows that success at their organisation is based on how they contribute, not who they are, and where everyone feels safe to challenge and to express their opinions. We think that the workplace will only change in terms of the benefits of diversity and inclusion if everyone feels like they belong, and that we all need to work together to build a better, kinder workplace.